Bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes. Ici Gabriel pour Destination New York en direct de Montréal au Québec. Aujourd'hui, on a voulu faire différent un peu sur Destination New York. On a voulu aller à la rencontre de personnes qui habitent à New York, qui travaillent à New York ou qui ont un lien avec la ville de New York. Dans cette période de pandémie, de confinement, on a voulu avoir leur pouls de l'intérieur, comment ça se passe là-bas à New York en ce moment. Comme premier invité, on a eu le bonheur de rencontrer Michael Silverstone, un photographe originaire de New York. Alors, pendant notre discussion, on va jaser avec lui sur sa passion pour la photographie, ainsi que la situation actuelle à New York, comment ça se passe pour lui là-bas. La discussion a été enregistrée samedi le 9 mai dernier. Et puis, donc, je vous souhaite une bonne écoute et on espère vous revoir dans un prochain épisode de Destination New York Rencontre. Salut! So, hi, Michael. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you to you to have accepted our invitation. It's very nice of you. So we'll start doing a quick bio of yourself. Actually, where were you? Are you born and raised in New York or in the United States, or you were from elsewhere?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in New York, in Manhattan, actually. That's where I pretty much lived my whole life. Live out in Brooklyn currently, although I've been hunkering down with my parents for the last couple months while sort of everything's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, lifelong New Yorker. Left to go to school up in Boston for a couple years, but outside of that, been here pretty much the whole time.
All right. Okay, so you pretty much know the city pretty well, and you know the vibe of the city from a long time for your whole life, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And I've read that you started being interested in photography more after a trip to Canada that you did a few years ago. And what was the purpose of that trip? Was it just to visit, or was there another purpose for the trip in Canada?
Yeah, so great question there. That was a trip that I did with an old friend. It was really, the purpose of it was a hiking trip, really.
Okay.
So we went out to the Canadian Rockies, beautiful area. One I actually wasn't really familiar with until it kind of emerged on Instagram. I think that's something that's led to its continued popularity with tourism outside of Canada. And so basically from that, I was taking pictures with my iPhone, but the trip is really centered around hiking. But I remember there was one moment when we were, after a long day, we were out in Jasper National Park, which is in Western Alberta. And we were trying to shoot stars at this lake. And I had never really handled any type of camera whatsoever before. My friend who I was with had a camera. And so while we weren't able to successfully capture the stars that night, I later found out, of course, it's because the gear that he had wasn't really meant for astrophotography or star photography. But regardless, I think that's kind of what really sparked my interest in this. And once I got back from that trip, and we're talking now early July 2017, I bought my first camera and haven't looked back.
That is very nice. And your friend had a camera photo at that point, or okay? Because with the phones, it's like quite impossible to take pictures of stars.
Yeah.
Of good quality, like the one you have behind you that you told me was your brother's that took those pictures. Are your whole family in the picture industry or the camera game, or it's mostly you and your brothers?
Just really me and my brother. My dad had some gear in the 80s that he used kind of as a hobby. And for my brother and I, it's still pretty much a hobby. But in particular, he has a lot of photography from when he was also at school in Boston, a lot of photography when he was in Israel, some in New York. And for me, it's pretty much mostly New York with a handful of sort of other places maybe sprinkled in. But for the most part, at least currently today, it's just me and him who are kind of doing that.
Okay. Cool. And what were you studying before this? Actually, were you studying something before getting into the photo world, or you were actually studying camera or photo and stuff like that?
Yeah, so my background, I would say, is that in college I studied history, politics. I was kind of on the pre-law track. I was planning on going to law school. Eventually decided not to do that. Now I'm actually working at a tech company. But in particular, as far as sort of how I learned photography, I hadn't really taken any courses ever, basically, where I learned sort of everything I know was at first basic sort of tutorials I found on YouTube.
Okay.
But then what I found has sort of been the most helpful for me is simply learning from other creators in New York. So whether that's through talking over Instagram message or actually shooting with them in person, that's when I learned about really like the whole science and intricacies of all these things that now seems so common and basic as far as my normal routine for photography. But back then I wasn't really familiar with. So it's been a very collaborative effort in that way.
Okay, so you're a self-learner, actually. You can say that you self-learned photography. And do you have one or a few photographer that you turn to for advices, or that you pretty much like their work that inspired you?
Yeah, so I would say in particular, I mean, it's such sort of a wide group of people now that I collaborate with and look up to, and we always help each other all the time. One person I definitely want to shout out, especially for learning my skills sort of earlier on, is a friend I have. His name is Corey. His Instagram is flight level photo, FOTO. He does a lot of nature photography with some city sprinkled in as well. He was actually the first person kind of through Instagram that I had met in person to shoot with. And he taught me so much of what I needed to know, whether it was how to manual focus or concepts like focus peaking. Again, things that seem so obvious now to me, but I completely didn't know what they were then. So he's definitely been influential, but really everyone I've been just continuously learning from.
So yeah, you came back from your trip, and then you started to take pictures in your city in New York. Were you still in Manhattan at that point, or you were in Brooklyn?
Yeah, so I was still in Manhattan at that point. I was living down on 27th and 2nd then. So yeah, I was initially, sort of a lot of shooting in that area, lower Manhattan as well. It would eventually be later on when I would actually kind of venture out into the other boroughs. And so I like to say is that even if I was sort of born and raised in Manhattan, and of course I've been to like the other boroughs before, but I haven't really explored them as much as since in the last couple of years when I've really been getting into photography. But definitely to start, it was still pretty sort of set on just Manhattan, maybe Brooklyn by the Brooklyn Bridge at some point. Then later on, eventually all over the place.
And what were the first things you wanted to take photos of in New York? I see your work is a lot of subways and trains in New York. I know you like that. And what did you start with?
Yeah, so there was actually one shot that I was absolutely obsessed with getting from the very beginning. In particular, I'm sure you may have seen this before. So on the Manhattan Bridge, just north of the Brooklyn Bridge, there's this one shot that everyone gets on the walking path where you're over the FDR Drive, which is sort of the highway road over by the river. And the goal of that shot is to sort of looking south at these other buildings, get kind of like the light trails of the cars. And it's a very, very difficult shot just because that bridge, it's not very stable and the trains are going by. So it's very tough to get a long exposure shot with the light trails with the bridge just constantly shaking. And I still want to say I haven't really nailed that shot yet. And I'm always like impressed whenever someone does. But that was the shot that I was like obsessed with getting, at least for the first couple months there.
All right. But you managed to, have you tried many times to get it?
Yeah, I've tried a bunch of times. Probably the last time I tried it was maybe around 5-6 months ago. I've even like tried it during the day without the trails, and I think it's pretty cool. But I really think you're like, now could probably be a good time just with like the subways being sort of on a much less frequent, a much more infrequent schedule there. Because really the goal is you have to time it perfectly where you need about pretty much like 15 to 30 seconds of no trains, but also no trucks or cars. So
yeah, now would be a good timing maybe.
Yeah.
Usually that must be hard.
Yeah.
And do you have that picture on your website somewhere, or?
I don't have it on my website. I might have it on my Instagram kind of way back. So I'll have to go look for that at some point later on.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you take the time, maybe I'll put it out on the screen right now. All right. So are your parents also, no, they're not in the art industry? You said your dad did this a bit of photo before, but it's mostly you and your brother that went to the art field.
Yeah, it's mostly me and my brother. They've come along with us sometimes. Like, let's say if there's like a spot that is kind of tough to get to by public transportation, We'll sometimes rent a car as a family and go out to like way out in Queens or way out in Brooklyn or to the Rockaways or somewhere. But yeah, otherwise they're definitely supportive of us, as you'll see with sort of this here. And in the other rooms, kind of both of our pictures are kind of sprinkled around all over the house there. But yeah, outside of kind of my dad doing a bit for hobby back in the day, they're not really as much sort of involved with it.
All right. So now that the city is mostly shut down, or locked down, actually for the last few weeks, few months, well, almost 2 months now. What was the best spot before to take a photo in the city? That your best spot, and what would be now the best spot to take photos in the city? Has it changed, or it's the same spot, or like what do you have a favorite spot that you had before and a new favorite spot that you have now?
Ooh, great question. That's a tough one. Let's see here. Well, I know if we're jumping in particular to spots now that I think are just so cool to shoot. So Times Square, which is like for the most part, New Yorkers would try to avoid.
Yeah.
I think it's so cool right now just to see kind of how empty it is, because a lot of the lights are still on, but it's so surprising seeing that empty. And I'm definitely afraid to get on the subway at this point, but definitely at one point I'll probably walk it. I want to say it's like maybe 2 or 3 miles from where I am. I'll definitely want to walk there and shoot. So as far as definitely in this current time, I think that would be the coolest spot. As far as before, some of my favorite spots, or I'd say cool spots to shoot, are definitely a lot of subway stations in Brooklyn that are above ground and have good views of the skyline. One I can think of is in kind of South Brooklyn off the F and G train called Smith 9th Street. It's actually it's the highest subway station in the world. You think subway's under, of course. Yeah, it's something like I don't know what it is in meters, but I think it's like 88. I think it's like 88
fine.
on the ground.
Okay.
But it's really cool because like one direction you'll have the skyline with the World Trade Center and Lower Manhattan. Another direction you'll have the Statue of Liberty. Another direction you'll have like the Midtown skyline, and you can get that all with sort of the train like in the background too. And now that I'm kind of like afraid to sort of go to the subways, just that seems to unfortunately be sort of like a place where it's definitely risky, and we really want to leave that sort of for the essential workers who need to take it. There's no reason that if we're not essential workers to be putting them at more risk. But definitely I would say that station, other stations as well, before this were definitely my favorite to shoot at.
Cool. Yeah, I'll definitely take a look at this subway station. Maybe next time I'm going in the city, because you pretty sold it to me very well. And yeah, I've heard that Times Square is like the worst place for New Yorkers, but now it must be so fun, as you said, to go there and there's no one around. Yeah, you mentioned the subway. Is it closed except for essential workers? Or it's just like not recommended to go except if you are an essential worker?
Yeah, so as far as what I know, I mean, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily closed to anybody, except of course now they're closing overnight to do cleanings and disinfecting. But as far as I know, it's just sort of essential workers going on it. I know there's sort of a big issue right now about a lot of the trains being pretty crowded. And as much as sort of there's definitely been issues in the past with sort of how the trains were run and just sort of higher up management and sort of handling of funds, I won't get into that necessarily. But a lot of it now also has to do with the fact that a lot of transit workers have been getting sick, and unfortunately a handful have passed away. And that's just actually, by that sort of nature of it, they've actually had to cut a lot of sort of routes of the trains as well, just because they don't have the train employees to actually run everything. But yeah, as far as I know, it's really only essential workers who are going to actually be on the train, because everyone else who's kind of worked from home is kind of just sort of staying away from that for now. And yeah, just a lot less. The trains are definitely running a lot less frequently. And I know some lines they've stopped entirely to make sure they could supplement some of the more popular sort of neighboring lines with.
And for you, that you were, well, you pretty much like taking subway pictures and stuff. What has changed the most during this time? Have you changed your type of work, or have you changed your mentality regarding how you take your picture and where you're going to take them? Or what have it changed the most during this specific time?
Yeah, and I want to say this, and I don't want to necessarily speak for other photographers as well, although definitely people I know this is the case too. What we're actually doing is going back, kind of digging through our folders and archives of all these photos that we've taken, and sort of whether it's editing ones that we've currently posted already or finding ones that we hadn't touched yet that we kind of want to work on. A lot of us have been doing that just by nature of whether it's subways or really anywhere, a lot of people simply aren't going outside to shoot. So it's definitely challenged us as far as improving our editing skills, just to sort of brush up on that because we're inside, kind of get the focus on that. And I always like to say for every time I post a picture, there's about 100, 200, maybe even 500 photos that I took on that day as well that I didn't post. And I often have a tough time letting them go. So I kind of just import all of them and have them on my hard drive. And even if I think they're like useless photos, it's actually kind of fun going back now, seemingly out of desperation to find photos that that I thought were throwaways and actually ending up like liking them a lot and seeing other people kind of like them a lot as well. So that's definitely been the focus. Now that I'm sort of running low on new photos, sort of looking back at the old ones that I haven't edited yet.
Have you go out taking pictures still, or you didn't go out for the last few weeks to take pictures?
Since this started, I've gone out 3 times, and all 3 times was early in the morning on a weekend when nobody's out. So outside of that, not during the day, not during the evening. And that was just to shoot to shoot the cherry blossoms in the spring when sort of the leaves are turning pink there. Those are literally been the only times that I've gone out to shoot in the past 2 months, actually.
And did you take unusual photos during those times, like empty places, or like you mentioned, Times Square were empty? Did you take photos of that once you go there, or?
I haven't been down there yet, but I definitely want to shoot there, especially the empty streets. One thing I was getting for is a photo I took recently in Central Park next to the reservoir where people often run in the morning. I wanted to make sure sort of when I framed the runner that it was someone either wearing a mask or some type of face covering to get it there. So I'd say that's probably the only really quarantine related photo that I've actually taken so far. Another one I think that I took recently was one where I'm kind of standing in the middle of the street looking towards the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it was fun kind of standing there because I didn't actually have to move because like no cars were coming. But I've definitely seen people like take photos looking down, like whether it's Times Square or looking down like an entire avenue and there's like no cars whatsoever. So I definitely want to try to get some of those. It's just a matter of making sure that I'm getting out safely and at a time of day where there aren't really many people around.
All right. Also, after some people compared this present situation in New York City to the situation after 9/11 happened 20 years ago. After 9/11, we felt a big wave of solidarity between New Yorkers. I guess it came to resemble a brotherhood a little bit more, maybe than the cold. Well, maybe than compared to the cold sense you could get there. That's the reputation New Yorkers had before. Do you feel some type of solidarity now between New Yorkers during this time? When you go in the streets, I know you don't go out that much, but do you feel some type of solidarity between New Yorkers?
Yeah, and I would definitely say absolutely in there. And there certainly could be some parallels to sort of back then during 9/11. I think I was 7 years old when it happened, so I was pretty young, but I definitely remember it. And of course, I think a big effort back then was sort of everyone's gratefulness and also assistance when it came to the first responders who were actually down at ground zero for weeks, months at a time, cleaning up everything. So I remember helping them out. I think I remember as a family, we donated a couple air mattresses or mattresses for them because people were working around the clock. And it's a bit different now. I think there's that same sense of solidarity, but of course, everyone's doing it from inside their homes. We're not really interacting as much, of course, physically. But I'm sure, as you may know, and this is across all cities, there's, of course, each night at 7 o'clock when the healthcare workers are switching shifts. we kind of do like a clap and salute for them.
Yeah.
I've been involved with as well, sort of a couple efforts along with other photographers as well to raise money to donate PPE and protective equipment to healthcare workers as well. So I'd say we're definitely very grateful. And I always say as well, it's definitely important to sort of, if you have any friends who work in hospitals, whether they're doctors, nurses, paramedics, whatever they do, it definitely would be good to reach out to them, because I know they're probably under a lot of stress right now. And we're definitely sort of grateful for everything that they do. But I really think the cities generally come together. And I think sort of the best thing that we can do is simply just respect the sort of the guidelines that were laid out for us. I think the governor of New York himself said the best way to thank those in healthcare is to wear a mask, to social distance. We kind of want to end this thing and make this sort of go away as quickly as we possibly can. And so a lot of that, of course, we'll do with following directions. And it's good to see that generally, at least in New York City, people are doing that.
Yeah, great. And is the 7 p.m. Clapping and thanking the healthcare workers going on around the whole city and for as far as you know, in all the neighborhoods, or is it mostly in Manhattan and Brooklyn, or is it also in Queens, Bronx, Staten Island?
Yeah, so I've seen on people's Instagram stories that it's pretty much going on all over all the boroughs. I'd say it's probably definitely a bit louder by actual hospitals, but it's definitely been going on everywhere as far as I've seen. Big neighborhoods, small neighborhoods, big buildings, little buildings. So it's cool to see the city come together like that.
Yeah, that's cool. And so the New-Yorkais we used to know over the last maybe 10 to 15 years will change, obviously, when it's going to reopen. What is the thing you think would be the most different than before? Do you like it's one of the most dense population in the world, and it's one of the most visited places in the world as also. So how do you think, in your opinion, all of this will come together once we're going to get out of that crisis, once the city will be open again to usual work and to tourism as well, which is a big part of the economy for the city?
Well, I tell people this, and I don't want to get like political at all, but I basically say now that in any future like campaign, whether it's local, state, president, like it's always before it's been, how are you going to solve the economy? How are you going to solve healthcare? But now I think like that third thing, because we're all living through this moment now, it's going to be like, how are you going to deal with a pandemic? What are you going to do? So that's going to be such a big focus, considering how fresh it is in our minds. And I mean, it's definitely, I'd say, going to be little things. I don't know if this will actually happen, but I saw they're trying to like develop a technology where it's some sort of like thing you walk through, like a metal detector, but it might be able to detect like if you have a fever or temperature or something. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but who knows? And I think sort of things I can definitely see changing. Unfortunately, it could be the case, at least sort of in the beginning, that that restaurants might have to sort of limit the number of seats they have, sort of separate that a bit. And I think offices where people can work from home, they might try to maintain that when it's the case. I think it's going to be tough to tell probably until we actually have sort of a vaccine, sort of proper testing for it, at least sort of widespread. At that point, we might be able to see, because it could be possible we could totally go back to normal if we have a vaccine, or depending on how sort of our bodies react to however the virus changes. But definitely when they start rolling it out at first with reopening, it's probably going to be very different than it was sort of just before.
And do you think people will go a bit, not crazy, but will go out at tons of people at the time when they're going to say, okay, now it's fine, you can go to park? Because we've seen pictures, and sometimes with the angle, I know it can be tricky if the people are really respecting the social distancing rules. But yeah, do you think once they're going to say, okay, parks are open, or life has, you can go out and stuff, while people are going to go crazy and go out all at the same time, all at the same place, a bit like it was before, or people will be a bit scared of going back to the places?
Yeah, so there's always going to be people that will definitely be fearful of it. I definitely see, though, I can definitely picture already a lot of people kind of gathering. Like, as you may have seen, for example, last weekend, New York had like beautiful weather last weekend, and there were a ton of people gathering in the parks without masks or staying close to one another. I think inevitably, just because there are so many people here, there will definitely be a lot of people that are very cautious about that. But for sure, there's definitely going to be people that do that, and I might be staying away at least.
A few weeks, few months still. Yeah, it was like that here in Montreal also last weekend. Very good weather, and people were out because people want to go and get out and enjoy the weather. We're like kind of tired of being inside. All right, and do you have most of restaurants in your area or in the city, as far as you know, are have adapted their situation to open for deliveries, or are they mostly closed? Do you think some restaurants also will stay closed after that, like they're not going to be able to reopen after the crisis?
Yeah, so I'd say even particular in sort of the neighborhood, because I can't speak for Brooklyn where I normally live necessarily, just because I haven't been there for a couple months. But where I am now with my parents on the sort of Upper East Side, it's kind of crazy because the whole sort of the Second Avenue subway, as they call it, which was the Q train being extended up here for a solid decade, I think from 2007 to 2017, it was totally dead because they had construction everywhere and businesses were really struggling. And so they had kind of that 3-year window also of now a lot more people are coming up here because of the train. But then it's kind of gone right back to that. But I could see, of course, I've seen there are restaurants that have totally sort of boarded up and they aren't going there. I see other restaurants that just do takeout and delivery. Definitely seeing a lot more delivery bikes than usual for sure. But yeah, it's going to be tough to kind of see how they recover from it. I think a lot of it's going to have to do with sort of, let's say like city or state laws when it comes to sort of rent and all that. I think a lot of sort of the comeback rests on that as well, sort of how the government decides to go about it.
Yeah, we'll see that in the next few months, actually. I know Governor mentioned, well, it's quite early, but they mentioned maybe some part in the States will be able to reopen in a week from now. I heard May 15, but as far as for New York City, I guess it's going to be a few weeks, a few months also still of strict measures, and the city quite in a lockdown for most part of it, actually.
Yeah, I would say even if it definitely hit us before other states and we're kind of like, I guess, plateauing now, or we're over that main hump, it's probably going to be the case that New York City will be kind of one of the last places to be open. Yeah. Just as we were mentioning before, just basically sort of how densely packed the city is. So.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. If we want to see your work, I know you have a pretty good website with very nice pictures. We should follow you on Instagram? Is it mostly where you post your pictures?
Yeah, so Instagram's going to be where I post all the photos. I try to post one photo a day in the morning. You can find me on Instagram at Stone Mike. So that's STONEMIK. On my website, I'm exclusively pretty much posting the photos that I want to sell. So there's some instances where I don't feel comfortable selling certain photos I post on Instagram. But everything I post on my website's for sale. Although that kind of is on hold right now, just with sort of the virus going on and everything. But yeah, definitely Instagram's going to be my main hub for this for sure.
Okay, yeah, I'll put your handle as well on the video for your Instagram and your website. So once you're selling back the pictures, if someone is interested on one or more of your photos on your website, they can shop on it, or do you have a contact form that they can ask you?
Yep. So I have a contact form. I'm working with one of my friends who's a web developer to integrate a sort of actual direct payment on there. So that's something I definitely want to work on during this time. For now, it's just sort of people can contact me and then we'll discuss. I have my prices on my website, but I definitely wanted to bring attention to as well one project that I'm doing currently with a handful of other photographers. We kind of all each submitted a photo that we think is symbolic of sort of hope and goodness in the future. And that website, which I believe is NewYorkCityHopeful.com, I believe. I might have to check that, but I'll send that to you. In particular, that website, all the proceeds for photos purchased on that website are going to go to hospital funds I believe, for coronavirus research and treatment there. So
that's very nice.
Focusing our efforts on that.
And just before letting you go, I was wondering if you could choose one of your pictures that you took. I know it might be difficult, but do you have one favorite picture, the one you're mostly proud of from all your works?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say the picture that I'm most proud of is a picture I took of the 7 train out in Queens with Citi Field, where the New York Mets, who are my baseball team, where they play. So I went out there with a couple of friends from a parking garage and took a picture of the train there. So I think that one's probably my current favorite.
All right, and is this one on your website for sale? Or yeah,
that one's on my website for sale. It's on my Instagram as well. I've actually posted it a couple times every now and then. But yeah, that one is definitely available.
Cool. Yeah, I'll post it on the video as well to show, and people can go see if they're interested to buy on your website. I'll put the address as well on the video.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Michael, very much for your time. Thank you again for accepting the invitation.
Of course, my
and
pleasure.
Best of luck for the rest of this crisis, and hopefully it's going to end sooner than later.
Hey, thanks very much. Definitely appreciate this, Gabrielle, and hoping to get up to Montreal at some point when the weather's good. Because the only time I've been there, it was like absolutely freezing. So I got to explore.
Yeah, between June and August, usually you're safe for the weather. So, well, now it's cold here, even though it's May. But yeah, during the summer, yeah, you'll get the warm weather for sure. All right, so we'll keep in touch, Michael. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Bye-bye. You too.
Bye.